The Bible talks a lot about preparing, being prepared to give an answer, preparing for Jesus' second coming, preparing our hearts, etc. But did you know that Jesus said he was going to prepare a place for us? John 14:3 says, "And if I go and prepare a place for you, I will come again and will take you to myself, that where I am, you may be also." Just like pioneers were those who forged ahead and prepared a home for their families and others who would come after them, Jesus is preparing a home for you in heaven. Let's take some time to thank him for preparing a place for us and for coming back to take us there.
Preparing for your journey. The wind is howling. It looks like a storm is coming on the horizon. The dark, angry clouds are menacing and giving you a shiver that seems to go through you like a shock of electricity. Your hands are cold. You look around you, nothing but trees as far as you can see. No city lights on the horizon, no smells of cooking food. Instead, you feel wind. You smell the damp scent of the forest before the rain, and you shake with a whole lot of cold. Your stomach growls angrily, and you can't remember the last time you ate. Food isn't as simple as just throwing something in the oven. You have to find the food, prepare the food, and cook the food, all with what you can find around you. You have no matches for a fire, no canvas or tarp for a tent, no heavy woolen blanket. What do you do first? Wow. Think about it. What would it be like to live off the land with no modern conveniences that we have today? It wasn't too long ago that a scenario like this was commonplace. Living off the land was not a fun challenge or something you tried out when you got lost when you're camping. It was a way of life. From the indigenous people to the early settlers, and then those who went west in search of new land to claim as their own. It's a part of our history. To this day, adventurers and those who want to live off the grid trek into the depths of the wilderness to stake their claim and create a self-sustaining homestead. Throughout this unit, we are going to look through the lens of history to see what it was like for the pioneers during the 1800s. These were the people who left the 3 colonies to expose and settle in the more western regions. Because we're looking at a time period when towns and mercantiles, or shops and stores, we are going to begin on the eastern shores of the North America and take a look at what life might have been like as you planned a journey west. Let's start at the beginning of the good adventures, the setting.
Let's set the stage. The original British colonies were all on the eastern shore of Canada and the United States of America. Have you ever wondered why that was? Take a look at the world map in the appendix and see if you can curl the edges of the paper so the Atlantic and Pacific Ocean touch. Pass the map around and trace a route from England to the east coast of North America. Now trace a new shipping route to the west coast. As far as colonization went, England sent ships on the nearest route possible. Much of this new world, as it was called, was still being discovered, as were trade and ocean routes. Building the colonies, establishing control of the region, and separating from Britain had kept the first American settlers well occupied for over 100 years. When things finally settled down and they gained their independence, explorers began to take the families and travel farther inland toward entirely new regions. While it is easy to think that these areas were completely empty, a blank slate, a new piece of paper to write on, they were actually occupied by indigenous peoples. Hundreds of peoples groups Individual languages and unique cultures were represented by the people who lived off the land before Europeans arrived. Expanding westward meant many of the hardships you probably already thought of: finding enough food, finding enough water, building shelter, and staying healthy. However, it also meant conflict and misunderstandings between people groups as each fought to maintain what they felt was right. In 1862, President Abraham Lincoln passed the Homestead Act. It allowed American people to claim up to 160 acres of land, though it did have requirements. There was a fee, a house had to be built, and you had to live there a certain amount of time. Interestingly, Canada followed suit with the Dominion Lands Act in 1872. These acts were a large incentive for people to pack up their families and have a fresh start. But as large swaths of land were parceled out to settlers, indigenous peoples were eventually forced out of their native hunting grounds and even homes and villages. If they did not leave willingly, they were forcibly removed and placed onto reservations. These were government-owned lands that were meant to contain indigenous peoples. Attempts were made on and off these reservations to assimilate them. It was an attempt to make indigenous peoples forget who they were and become what the settlers of the land thought appropriate and right. What remained for hundreds of years, the land of opportunity for many, meant deep heartache for others.
Embarking on a journey. Imagine with me your dad bounding through the door, a piece of paper in his hand. We're doing it. We're going west. Pack your things, kids. Leaving your friends, school, and everything you know to go to a land where you would be largely alone and isolated. For over 100 years, the government offered this land incentive. And while millions of people applied for it, only about 1.6 million successfully met the requirements. If you came from a poor background, if you were a freed slave trying to start over in a culture still heavily influenced with the lingering effects of racism, if you were an immigrant escaping famine or even difficult circumstances, you had a chance to start a new life. The only catch was you would have to live off of the land. And as we will learn in this unit, that was no small feat. You guys should know. Well, the Homestead Act did bring many pioneers to new homes. Many farmers simply couldn't afford the fee. The majority of land was bought or settled on by wealthy businessmen, lumbermen, railwaymen, and the like. Many people who did see a new life couldn't handle the hardships or weren't able to meet the requirements and packed up and went home. But those who did make it, the ones who persevered, those are the pioneers we will learn about in this unit. Early pioneers would pack a wagon and sleep in it like a tent on wheels as they made their way through the rough trails of the new home. They likely went to the local store to stock up on dried goods, like coffee or tea, flour, sugar, seeds to plant, tools, and anything else that might help them get started while they waited for their land to produce for them. Perhaps they would talk with the other pioneers or the explorers who had been across the Appalachian Mountains as they planned their route and figured out what their new life might look like. They would need axes and saws to chop wood, kettles and dishes to cook their food, warm blankets and clothing to survive the long winters, knives, guns, and ammunition for protection and hunting, and so forth. Many pioneers also brought along some farm animals to help get them started on their homestead.